What a pity, sighed a tired toad in a shabby green robe. He was staring at the once beautiful mushroom house, masterfully carved by himself a long time ago. But now it was just an old, crooked building with pale moss and thick spider web covering every curve and window. The entrance, with a round oaken door, almost collapsed, and a part of the cap roof fell off. Last pair of winters were obviously too harsh, even for such a carefully planned architecture. It was one of the first projects that he mastered all by himself after finishing the carving school of the Great Bog. He was then noticed, and after 5 years of honest hard work, he was invited to plan a project of the royal castle, together with a few more famous carvers from the far swamps. It is hard to describe what a huge honor it was for him, and as he saw his name, Brog the Builder, woven with a golden thread amongst others on the huge royal carpet decorating the main castle hall, he stood there dazed with a clear thought. This is it. This is the biggest creation of my life. However, it was surprisingly painful to see that insignificant old creation in front of him slowly vanishing. It was an ordinary house for a simple toad family, but it was where everything started. Well, muttered Brog the Builder to himself, waking up from his own thoughts. This family needs a new home anyway, and I will do my best to create the most beautiful thing in a simple way I've ever made before. quiet rustling in the thick swamp bushes got attention for the little toad, playing with his friend in the late summer evening. "Hush! What was that?" "I didn't hear anything, but it could be fish or just a breeze." No, replied the first toad, a little worried. "There is surely something bigger than a fish, and it moves above the water." In that moment, a sharp boat's edge appeared out of the plant's thickness. An old, frowning toad was sitting on that boat, made of a dried, oiled water lily, with 2 big sacks on each side of it. Focused on his own thoughts, he did not smile. Yet the children could say that he was a friendly creature. "Good evening, little folks," said the boat toad, and coughed. "I hope I did not disturb your peaceful game. I am just passing by to see if the south corner of the swamp already has something to offer." "What is it the swamp can offer you?" asked one of the little toads with undisguised interest. "The finest berries in all the kingdom, of course. Now, have a good evening, little ones. I've got no time to waste." With these words, he made 2 strong pushes with his beautiful, lightweight paddle and disappeared behind the low willow branches. "Who was that?" asked the youngest toad. "That was old Bog, the berry belly," said the other one proudly. "My granny told me stories about him and his craft. He doesn't like company, but as far as I know, every cure potion we've got for winter is made out of these rare berries he finds. Oh, it is getting late. Let's get back home before everyone starts to worry about us." "I want to be a boat toad too when I grow up," cried the youngest toad, inspired, catching up with his friend up the hill. It was a dark winter night, and the wind was howling like 1,000 beasts. For 3 days, a hunter had been chasing a peculiar creature, a fairy bug of the great bog. It was such a rare thing to come across this bug that its shadowed nature started to grow over with dozens of strange stories and myths. Some believed that it was a witch trapped in a body of an insect. The others thought that it could make your deepest dreams come true. The hunter himself heard a lot of unbelievable stories like that, but did not believe in them, to be honest. The only thing he learned from his father is that it was a very rare creature with some half-magical properties, and that its meat could feed a few toad families for at least a month long. So with full dedication, he was chasing the bug over the snow hills and curly dark roots sticking above the frozen ground. When the hunter grew weary after hours of his run, he decided to make a humble camp with a bonfire beneath an old oak tree to warm up his tired bones. He dozed off on a soft bed of moss, and suddenly a truly fairy creature appeared in front of him, floating behind the flames. "I know what you want, hunter," whispered the bug, "and you have a choice. You can try to kill me and bring me back to your swamp to the joy of your folk, or you can make your bow sing the most beautiful song, and if my heart sings to it as well, I will make one dearest dream of yours come true." The hunter kept silence for a while, then stood up, took out his bow and started playing as if it was a harp. A beautiful melody resonated in the bow's wood, and the fairy bug started to swing slowly. When the song was finished, the bug said, "Tell me, hunter, what is it you wish?" "I wish to feed everyone in my swamp so that no one would starve this long, dark winter." "I will do as you wish, hunter," replied the fairy bug, and with a flash of blue light, disappeared in the clear night sky full of shimmering stars. At least 100 joyful toads met the hunter that night. They couldn't believe their eyes, but each cellar of their mushroom houses was full of food of every sort that could be enough to feed them the whole winter, and even the neighboring swamp east of the croaked forest. The hunter told them his story, and from that time everyone in this swamp and in the whole kingdom afterwards called him Fog, the Singing Bow. Dark winter's coming, little fellow, and every song is getting mellow. The folks are gathered round the hearth to talk and think about their path. Before we see the light of day, the time is right to hear a tale. One tale or two of winds and fires to soothe adventurous desires, a tale of simple folks and kings, of ancient sorceries and rings. For every taste I'll find a word about a bug, about a toad. Now listen, bog and dungeon dweller, my name is Krog, the storyteller. I'm waiting, friend, this is your turn, to choose a tale that keeps us warm.